Vanessa will be staying with us. Richard said it so casually that Evelyn Hartwell almost wondered whether she had misunderstood him. She stood just inside the entrance of Hartwell Mansion, one hand still resting on the handle of her suitcase, while rainwater shimmered across the marble floor beneath her shoes. After 12 days away managing an emergency at her family's charitable foundation in Boston, she had expected to come home to familiar silence. Instead, the house felt like it had learned to breathe without her. The first thing she noticed was the portrait. Their wedding photograph had always hung beside the sweeping staircase, framed in dark walnut beneath a brass picture light. Now it was gone. In its place hung an abstract painting Evelyn had never seen before. The second thing she noticed was the staff. Margaret, the housekeeper who had worked for the Hartwell family for nearly 20 years, was nowhere in sight. Neither was Thomas, the groundskeeper who normally appeared before Evelyn had even finished opening the front door. A young woman in a black uniform approached instead. "May I take your coat, Mrs. Bennet?" Evelyn looked at her. "I am sorry. Have we met?" The woman hesitated. "No, ma'am. Mr. Bennet hired me last week." Mr. Bennet. In this house, that title had once belonged to Evelyn's father. Before she could answer, laughter drifted from the sitting room. A woman's laughter. Bright, comfortable, familiar with the room. Evelyn walked toward the sound and stopped at the doorway. Vanessa Pierce sat curled into the cream-colored sofa beside the fireplace, holding one of Evelyn's crystal wineglasses. She wore an ivory sweater and looked entirely at home. Richard stood near the bar pouring himself a drink. He did not cross the room to greet his wife. "You are back early," he said. "My flight was changed." Evelyn's gaze moved to Vanessa. "I can see I missed something." Vanessa rose with an apologetic smile that somehow contained no apology. "Richard said you would understand." "Understand what?" Richard exhaled as though Evelyn were making an easy conversation unnecessarily difficult. "Vanessa is consulting on the Meridian acquisition. We have late meetings. It makes more sense for her to stay here than drive back into the city every night." Evelyn looked from him to Vanessa. The mansion had 14 guest rooms. Yet Vanessa's leather overnight bag was resting near the private staircase leading toward the family bedrooms. Evelyn said nothing about it. That silence seemed to relax Richard. It was a mistake he had been making more often lately. He had begun confusing her patience with permission. "Where is Margaret?" Evelyn asked. Richard took a slow sip. "I let her go." Something inside Evelyn went very still. "You fired Margaret?" "She was resistant to change. She worked for my parents before either of us lived here." Richard's jaw tightened. "And now we live here, Evelyn. Things change." Vanessa lowered her eyes toward her wine, but Evelyn caught the smallest smile at the corner of her mouth. Then something silver flashed beneath the warm light. Around Vanessa's wrist was a delicate bracelet with a tiny sapphire clasp. Evelyn knew every scratch on it. Her mother had worn it for 27 years. After her funeral, Evelyn had placed it inside a velvet box in the locked drawer of her bedroom dressing table. Vanessa noticed where she was looking and lightly touched the bracelet. "Beautiful, is it not?" Richard said it was just sitting upstairs. Evelyn turned to her husband. Richard finally looked uncomfortable. "It is only jewelry." Evelyn held his gaze for several seconds, then gave a quiet nod. "Of course." She picked up her suitcase. Richard seemed relieved again. He should not have been. Evelyn walked toward the staircase, passing the empty space where her wedding portrait had once hung. Halfway up, she stopped. The hallway security panel beside the landing was glowing red. She entered the access code she had used for 11 years. Incorrect. She tried again. Incorrect. Behind her, Richard called, "I changed the codes while you were gone." Evelyn slowly turned toward him. "Why?" Richard shrugged. "Security." For the first time that evening, Evelyn smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Because Richard had forgotten something important about Hartwell Mansion. There were locks in this house he could change, and there were doors he had never known existed. Evelyn did not ask Richard for the new security code again. She simply carried her suitcase down the east hallway, listening to the familiar house reveal how unfamiliar it had become. A vase of white roses stood where her mother had always kept fresh hydrangeas. The antique clock near the library had been moved. Even the small silver tray where Margaret used to leave the morning mail was gone. None of those things mattered by themselves, yet together they felt like fingerprints left by someone slowly rearranging her life. Inside the bedroom, Evelyn closed the door and immediately noticed that Richard's side of the closet was nearly empty. She ran her fingers across the vacant hangers, then looked toward her dressing table. The top drawer was slightly open. Her mother's bracelet had been kept there. Evelyn pulled it wider. The blue velvet box was empty. She stared at it for several seconds before carefully closing the drawer. Anger would have been easier. Anger could have filled the room, demanded explanations, shattered the strange calm Richard seemed so certain she would maintain. Instead, Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed and listened to Vanessa laughing somewhere downstairs. Richard had always misunderstood Evelyn's silence. He thought silence meant surrender. He had never understood that Evelyn had been raised by people who believed the most important decisions were rarely made while someone was shouting. Her father, Charles Hartwell, had taught her that. 11 years earlier, shortly before his health began to fail, he had walked Evelyn through every room of the estate and explained which paintings had belonged to her grandmother, which acres were protected by the family trust, and why ownership carried responsibility rather than privilege. On that final afternoon, he had placed an old brass key in her palm. A house this large can make people believe power belongs to whoever speaks the loudest, he had told her. Do not believe them. Evelyn had kept the key ever since. She rose and crossed to the built-in bookcase beside the fireplace. On the third shelf sat a worn hardcover copy of The Great Gatsby that Richard had never bothered to open. Evelyn removed it, reached behind the shelf, and pressed a small recessed latch. A narrow compartment clicked open. Inside were three things: the brass key, a sealed envelope bearing the Hartwell family attorney's name, and a matte black card with no company logo. Only a telephone number was printed across its surface. Evelyn lifted the key first. Its edges were worn smooth from years in her father's desk. Then she picked up the black card. She had not touched it since shortly after the wedding. Her thumb hovered over the number as she reached for her phone. One call would bring questions Richard was not prepared to answer. One call would also turn suspicion into something impossible to ignore. She entered the first 6 digits, then stopped. No. Not yet. She needed facts before she needed force. Evelyn erased the number and returned the card to the compartment, but she slipped the brass key into her coat pocket. A knock sounded behind her. She closed the hidden panel before Richard entered. "Dinner is at 8, he said. His eyes moved briefly toward the bookcase. "Vanessa thought we could discuss the acquisition together." Evelyn turned. "Since when do your business consultants wear my mother's jewelry?" Richard's expression tightened. "I told you, it was a misunderstanding." "Did she misunderstand which drawer it was in?" "Do not make this bigger than it is." Evelyn studied the man she had married and realized how often he had used that sentence whenever something mattered deeply to her. "Where is Margaret?" she asked again. "I already told you." "You told me you fired her." "You did not tell me why." Richard looked impatient. "Because this house needed people loyal to the way I run things." There it was. Not our house. Not our life. The way I run things. Evelyn glanced toward the hallway, where the unfamiliar security panel glowed red. "And when did you start running Hartwell Estate?" Richard gave a humorless smile. "Evelyn, we have been married for 8 years. At some point, you have to stop acting like everything here still belongs to your father." Her fingers closed around the brass key inside her pocket. "You are right," she said softly. Richard relaxed, hearing agreement where none existed. Evelyn walked past him toward the door. It does not belong to my father anymore. Richard watched her leave without asking what she meant, and downstairs, Vanessa raised Evelyn's crystal glass as though she had already won something. Neither of them noticed Evelyn take out her phone in the hallway and send a short message to the family attorney. I need every current document connected to Hartwell Estate. Tonight. By midnight, Evelyn had learned that Richard's greatest talent was not ambition. It was forgetting who had opened the first door for him. 8 years earlier, he had been Richard Bennett, a smart but struggling financial consultant with a rented apartment in Brooklyn and exactly 2 suits he rotated between client meetings. Evelyn had met him at a charity planning dinner in Manhattan, where he had arrived 20 minutes late after his subway stalled underground. He had been embarrassed by his inexpensive watch and nervous around people whose last names appeared on hospital wings. Evelyn had liked him because he seemed unimpressed by wealth. Or perhaps she had simply wanted to believe he was. When another guest mocked Richard's small firm, Evelyn had quietly redirected the conversation toward his ideas. 6 months later, when he needed introductions to investors, she made 3 calls. She never gave him money. She gave him something more valuable, credibility. Richard worked hard with it. That was why Evelyn had loved him. He remembered birthdays, carried groceries without being asked, and once drove nearly 400 miles through heavy rain because Evelyn's father had been hospitalized while she was attending a conference. Back then, Richard never entered Hartwell Mansion without greeting Margaret first. He never sat in Charles Hartwell's chair. He never called the estate his. The changes came slowly enough to excuse. After Charles died, Richard began attending more Hartwell Foundation events with Evelyn. People remembered him. Invitations arrived in both their names. Then business magazines started photographing him at galas, and Richard discovered how quickly proximity to old money could be mistaken for possession of it. When his investment company finally succeeded, he stopped mentioning the introductions Evelyn had made. He called himself self-made. Evelyn never corrected him. When he moved his office into the West Wing, she told herself married people shared space. When he replaced her father's old desk, she told herself furniture was not memory. When he began answering questions directed at her during foundation dinners, she told herself confidence was not disrespect. Every small surrender seemed too minor to defend. Together, they became a pattern. At 12:17 that night, Evelyn sat alone in the library while rain tapped softly against the tall windows. Her laptop glowed on the desk. An email from Daniel Mercer, the Hartwell family attorney, had arrived 11 minutes earlier. Attached were property records, trust documents, insurance schedules, and security agreements. Evelyn read every page. Hartwell Mansion, its surrounding 86 acres, and the protected family assets remained exactly where her father had placed them years ago, inside the Hartwell Legacy Trust, with Evelyn as controlling beneficiary. Richard had residency through marriage. Nothing more. She leaned back slowly. She had known that, of course. But seeing the documents reminded her of something she had allowed 8 years of marriage to blur. Richard's confidence had changed. The paperwork had not. Footsteps approached. Vanessa appeared in the library doorway carrying a mug of tea. Still working? She asked. Apparently. Vanessa entered without invitation and glanced toward the screen. Evelyn lowered the laptop lid. Vanessa smiled. Richard worries you carry too much responsibility. Does he? He thinks you have trouble letting go. Evelyn studied her. Of what? Vanessa's eyes drifted around the library. The past. Your father's traditions. Old staff. Old ways of doing things. Evelyn almost smiled. Vanessa had been inside this house for days and already spoke as though she were discussing renovations to something she owned. Richard tells you a great deal. We work closely. I am beginning to understand that. For the first time, Vanessa's confidence slipped. Only slightly. Then she set down her tea. He has built an extraordinary life. Evelyn looked toward the portrait of Charles Hartwell above the fireplace. Yes, she said quietly. He has become very comfortable inside one. Vanessa left a moment later. Evelyn reopened her laptop. Another email from Daniel had arrived. This one contained only 2 sentences. Evelyn read them twice. Richard contacted our office 3 weeks ago asking whether Hartwell Estate could be pledged as collateral for a private acquisition. I refuse to discuss trust assets without your written authorization. Evelyn's hand stopped on the trackpad. Suddenly, the changed staff, the new security codes, and Vanessa's presence no longer felt like separate insults. They felt like preparation. Then a message appeared on her phone from Richard. Tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. We need your signature on the Meridian documents. Evelyn looked at the brass key beside her laptop and finally understood why Richard had been so eager for her to come home. At 9 the next morning, Richard placed a fountain pen beside Evelyn's coffee and smiled as though he were offering her breakfast. This is routine, he said. Evelyn looked at the thick document centered on the dining room table. Vanessa sat to Richard's right with a leather portfolio open before her, dressed for a boardroom rather than breakfast. Outside, pale sunlight stretched across the lawn, touching the bare oak trees beyond the windows. Inside, the room felt colder than the November morning. Routine documents usually do not require my signature before I finish my coffee, Evelyn said. Richard leaned back. Meridian is moving faster than expected. We have an opportunity to close before another buyer enters. And what exactly am I authorizing? Vanessa answered before Richard could. A restructuring of certain family assets to improve financing flexibility. Evelyn turned toward her. Family assets? Vanessa maintained her polished smile. That is the legal language. No. That is vague language. Richard sighed. Evelyn, please. Vanessa has spent weeks building this acquisition. Evelyn opened the document. She already knew what Daniel had warned her about, but she wanted to hear how far Richard was willing to go. She turned one page, then another. This provision allows assets controlled by the Hartwell Legacy Trust to be presented as supporting collateral. Richard's expression barely changed. Temporarily. You cannot pledge them. I know that. Then why is the language here? Vanessa folded her hands. Because lenders respond to stability. Hartwell Estate strengthens the financial profile. Evelyn looked at her. My family's home is not a line on Richard's balance sheet. The smile disappeared from Vanessa's face. Richard lowered his voice. This is exactly what I mean when I say you refuse to move forward. Your father built structures for a different era. My father built structures specifically to prevent people from doing this. Silence settled over the table. Richard glanced toward Vanessa, and Evelyn caught it. Not affection. Coordination. That disturbed her more. Vanessa pushed the document slightly closer. No one is taking anything from you, Evelyn. Hearing her first name in that tone made something sharpen inside Evelyn. Then you will not mind if Daniel Mercer reviews every page. Richard's hand flattened against the table. There is no time. Then there is no signature. Vanessa rose and walked toward the windows. Richard told me you might react emotionally. Evelyn almost laughed. I am reading a financing agreement. You know what I mean. Vanessa turned. You still treat this estate like a memorial. Richard is trying to build something. Evelyn studied her carefully. And what are you trying to build, Vanessa? Richard stood. Enough. Evelyn closed the document. I agree. She pushed the pen back toward him. We are finished. Richard's face hardened. Do you have any idea what is at stake? I am beginning to. Evelyn walked toward the door, but Vanessa spoke behind her. You cannot preserve everything forever. Evelyn stopped. No. But I can decide what I refuse to hand away. She left them in the dining room. 20 minutes later, Evelyn was crossing the upstairs hall when she heard voices through the half-open study door. Richard and Vanessa had moved there after breakfast. Evelyn had no intention of listening until she heard her own name. "She will never sign if Mercer gets involved," Vanessa said. Richard answered more quietly. "She will. Give me time." "You have been giving her time for years." A pause followed. Then Vanessa said something that made Evelyn stop completely. "You keep acting like this house is hers just because her name is on old paperwork." Richard replied, "Legally, it is complicated." "No, Richard. Emotionally, it is complicated for you. You still ask permission in a house you practically run." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the brass key in her pocket. Vanessa continued. "You changed the staff. You changed security. You manage the property. Start behaving like the owner." Richard did not correct her. That silence told Evelyn everything. She walked away before either of them saw her. At the end of the hallway, she entered her father's old office and closed the door. Her phone showed a new email from Daniel. He had reviewed the Meridian papers. His message was brief. "Do not sign anything. There are provisions here that concern me." Evelyn stared through the window toward the long driveway leading to the front gates. For days, she had wondered whether Vanessa wanted Richard. Now she understood that Vanessa wanted something much larger, and Richard was already helping her reach for it. By noon, Evelyn was sitting beneath a glass ceiling 30 miles from Hartwell Estate when a familiar voice behind her said, "You still hold your coffee with both hands when something is wrong." She turned slowly. Nathan Cole stood near the entrance to the Hartwell Community Foundation conference room, one hand in the pocket of a charcoal suit, his expression calm but observant. 7 years had passed since Evelyn had last seen him for more than a few minutes. Time had sharpened him. Nathan had once advised her father on corporate risk and executive security, back when Cole Meridian Capital was little more than an ambitious firm operating from 2 rented offices. Now his company managed investments across the country, and business magazines regularly placed his name beside the word millionaire. Yet the first thing Evelyn noticed was unchanged. Nathan still looked at people before he looked at the room around them. "And you still notice things nobody asked you to notice," she said. A faint smile appeared. Occupational habit. Evelyn had come to Manhattan for the Foundation's quarterly board meeting because canceling would have given Richard another reason to claim she was overwhelmed. She had expected lawyers, trustees, and grant proposals. She had not expected Nathan. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Cole Meridian is funding the housing initiative." He nodded toward the chair beside her. "May I?" Evelyn gestured toward it. The meeting began minutes later. For nearly 2 hours, Evelyn discussed budgets, community clinics, and affordable housing grants without mentioning Richard once. Nathan did not interrupt. He simply watched her in the quiet way he always had. After the board adjourned, Evelyn gathered her papers quickly. "You are leaving before lunch?" Nathan asked. "I have things waiting at home." "That sounds less like home and more like a deadline." Evelyn looked at him. "Nathan." "Evelyn." His tone was gentle, not teasing. That somehow made it harder to dismiss him. They walked toward the elevator together. Outside the windows, Manhattan moved beneath a gray November sky. "I heard Margaret no longer works at the estate," Nathan said. Evelyn stopped. "How did you hear that?" "Margaret called Marcus Reed." The name landed heavily. Marcus had led Hartwell Executive Protection during her father's final years. Evelyn had not spoken to him in months. Why would she call Marcus? Because she was worried. The elevator doors opened, but Evelyn did not step inside. Nathan studied her face. "What happened?" "Nothing I cannot handle." "I did not ask whether you could handle it." "Then what are you asking?" "Whether you should have to handle it alone." Evelyn looked away. 7 years earlier, shortly after her father's death, Nathan had said something similar. She had been grieving, newly married, determined to prove she could build a life without leaning on the people who had protected her since childhood. Nathan had respected her decision, even when it created distance between them. That was one of the reasons she trusted him. It was also why seeing him now unsettled her. Richard is restructuring a business deal, she said carefully. He wants access to assets he cannot legally control. Nathan's expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. Hartwell assets? Yes. Does Daniel know? He does. And Marcus? Evelyn shook her head. No. Nathan was silent for a moment. You still have the black card? Her eyes met his. How do you know about that? Your father asked me to help design the original emergency protocol. Evelyn remembered the matte black card hidden behind the library shelf and suddenly understood why Nathan's name had always seemed connected to a part of her father's world Richard never knew. I do not need rescuing, she said. Nathan nodded immediately. Good. She blinked. Good? Because I was not offering rescue. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I am reminding you that asking professionals to do the jobs your father hired them to do is not weakness. Neither is protecting what belongs to you. The elevator chimed again. Evelyn stepped inside. Nathan remained outside. If you need me, call, he said. And if I do not? Then I will respect that. The doors began closing. Nathan. He looked at her. Evelyn almost told him about Vanessa, the bracelet, the changed locks, the documents. Instead she said, thank you. He nodded once. As the elevator descended, Evelyn looked at her reflection in the polished steel doors. For the first time since returning home, she did not feel trapped. She felt awake. Then her phone vibrated. A message from Daniel appeared on the screen. Richard has requested an emergency meeting with the trust administrator tomorrow. He is escalating this. The invitation arrived before Evelyn reached Hartwell Estate, and the name printed beneath Richard's made her read it twice. Richard Bennett and Vanessa Pierce request the pleasure of your company for an intimate dinner celebrating the Meridian acquisition. Evelyn stared at the message on her phone as the car moved through the estate gates. The dinner was scheduled for that evening. At her house. For a deal she had refused to authorize. By 7:30, the dining room glowed beneath two crystal chandeliers while 12 guests gathered around the long mahogany table. Richard had invited investors, attorneys, and 2 prominent board members. Vanessa had chosen the flowers, changed the place settings, and replaced Evelyn's mother's silver candlesticks with modern glass ones. But the clearest message waited at the table. Vanessa was seated at the head beside Richard. Evelyn's usual place. Evelyn paused only a second before taking the open chair farther down. Richard noticed. I hope you do not mind, he said. Vanessa needs to be near me for the presentation. Of course, Evelyn replied. Vanessa smiled as though she had just won a contest Evelyn had never agreed to enter. Dinner began politely. Richard spoke about expansion, growth, and legacy. Vanessa completed his sentences with practiced ease. Evelyn listened while the guests praised the acquisition as if it were already finished. Then Martin Caldwell, an investor in his 60s, raised his glass. Richard, I have to say, this estate is extraordinary. You have done very well for yourself. Richard smiled. Thank you, Martin. Evelyn set down her fork. Hartwell Estate has been in my family for 4 generations. The table quieted. Martin looked embarrassed. Of course. I meant no offense. None taken. Richard's smile remained, but his eyes hardened. Vanessa leaned forward. Richard has modernized so much of the property that sometimes it feels like his. Evelyn looked toward the woman sitting in her chair. Homes can feel like many things. Ownership is usually less confusing. Someone cleared his throat. Richard quickly changed the subject. A few minutes later, Vanessa stood beside a large screen and began presenting the Meridian financing structure. Charts appeared. Numbers followed. Then a slide labeled Strategic Asset Support filled the screen. Evelyn recognized the estate name immediately. Hartwell Legacy Trust. Her pulse slowed rather than quickened. Richard had not expected her to see this presentation. "Could you go back one slide?" Evelyn asked. Vanessa hesitated. "It is only a preliminary model." "Then going back should be easy." Richard interrupted. "Evelyn, this is not the time." She turned toward him. "You invited investors into my home to discuss my trust. I think this is exactly the time." Vanessa returned to the slide. Several guests shifted in their chairs. Evelyn looked at the numbers. The proposed financing model listed trust assets as contingent support. "Has the trust administrator approved this?" she asked. Vanessa answered carefully. "Discussions are ongoing." "That was not my question." Richard placed his napkin on the table. "We can discuss this privately." "We already did." I said no. The room became completely still. Evelyn did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Martin Caldwell lowered his glass. Another investor closed the folder in front of him. Vanessa's polished confidence began to crack. "This structure is standard," she said. "Not with assets you do not control," Evelyn replied. Richard stood. "Enough." Evelyn looked up at him. "Then tell them." "Tell them what?" "Tell everyone at this table that Hartwell Estate is not yours to pledge." Richard said nothing. That silence lasted only seconds, but it changed the room. Evelyn rose. "Please enjoy dinner. The kitchen prepared enough for everyone." She walked toward the doorway. Behind her, Vanessa called, "Running away does not make you right." Evelyn stopped and turned. "Neither does sitting in my chair." She left without another word. 20 minutes later, she stood alone in her father's office when her phone vibrated. Daniel Mercer was calling. "Evelyn," he said as soon as she answered, "Richard attended the emergency trust meeting this afternoon." She moved toward the window. "Without telling me?" "Yes. And there is something else. He presented documents suggesting you had already agreed in principle to the restructuring." Evelyn's hand tightened around the phone. "I agreed to nothing." "I know." Downstairs, laughter resumed around the dinner table. Evelyn looked through the glass toward the dark lawn and remembered Nathan's words. "Protecting what belongs to you is not weakness." "Daniel," she said quietly, "send me everything Richard presented today." There was a pause. "I already have." "Evelyn, whatever this started as, it is no longer just a business disagreement." The documents arrived at 1:14 in the morning, and by 1:20, Evelyn knew Richard had crossed a line their marriage could not uncross. She sat alone in her father's office with Daniel Mercer's email open across the screen. The papers Richard had presented to the trust administrator described Evelyn as supportive of the Meridian restructuring and willing to consider using Hartwell assets as financial support. Her signature was nowhere on them, but the language was designed to make her approval sound inevitable. Richard had not taken control. He had simply begun behaving as though her consent was a formality. Evelyn closed the file when she heard the office door open. Richard entered without knocking. His tie was gone, and the confidence he had worn through dinner had hardened into irritation. "You embarrassed me tonight." Evelyn looked at him. "I corrected you. In front of investors. You presented my trust to those investors." Richard walked toward the desk. "Our trust." "No." The single word stopped him. Evelyn rose. "That is the problem, Richard. You have spent so long calling everything ours that you have forgotten which things were never yours to offer." He laughed once, without humor. "There it is. The Hartwell name. Whenever you feel threatened, suddenly I am the outsider again. This is not about your last name. It has always been about my last name." His voice remained controlled, but years of resentment were finally visible beneath it. I built my company while everyone assumed your father handed it to me. Every room I entered, people saw Evelyn Hartwell's husband before they saw Richard Bennett. And how many of those rooms did you enter because I introduced you? Richard stared at her. Evelyn had never said it before. That made the truth heavier. I never asked you to repay me, she continued. I never corrected reporters when you called yourself self-made. I never reminded investors who made the first introductions. I wanted your success to belong to you. Then stop standing in my way now. By signing away control of assets you do not own? By trusting your husband. Evelyn's expression changed. Trust? She walked around the desk. You removed Margaret without telling me. You changed security codes. You brought Vanessa into this house. You let her wear my mother's bracelet. You asked the trust administrator to consider documents implying I supported a deal I had already rejected. Which part of that was supposed to earn trust? Richard looked toward the window. Vanessa understands what I am trying to build. Evelyn went still. I am sure she does. Silence stretched between them. Richard could have stepped back. He could have apologized. Instead, he said, my relationship with Vanessa is not only professional. The words were quiet, almost clinical. Evelyn had suspected it. Hearing him admit it still created a strange emptiness beneath her ribs. How long? She asked. Several months. Evelyn nodded once. No shouting. No tears offered for his comfort. Does she love you? Richard frowned. What kind of question is that? A simple one. She believes in me. Evelyn almost pitied him. Almost. That was not what I asked. Richard moved toward the door. Our marriage has been over for a long time, Evelyn. You just refuse to see it. Then why do you need my signature? He stopped. Evelyn watched his shoulders tighten. Because Meridian is bigger than whatever personal issues we have. No. You need my signature because without Hartwell backing, your financing is weaker. Richard turned around. You think you can destroy everything I built? I have not threatened your company. You do not have to. You control the estate, the trust, the foundation connections. You always have something hanging over me. Evelyn looked at the man she once drove hundreds of miles to meet at a hospital because he had wanted to be beside her. She wondered when love had become a ledger in his mind. I will not sign, she said. Richard's face became strangely calm. Then do not. The sudden change unsettled her. But understand something. If this marriage ends, the world will not automatically hand you everything because your name is Hartwell. You may discover you have far less than you think. Evelyn slipped one hand into her pocket and felt the old brass key against her fingers. Are you certain about that? Richard smiled. More certain than you are. He left and closed the door behind him. Evelyn waited until his footsteps disappeared before opening her phone. There was a new message from an unfamiliar number. At first, she thought it was spam. Then she read the attached photograph. Richard and Vanessa stood together outside a Manhattan hotel 6 weeks earlier, their hands intertwined as they entered a private business reception. Beneath it was one sentence. Mrs. Bennett, there are more records you should see before tomorrow. Evelyn stared at the image, then at the closed office door. Richard thought the argument had ended. Evelyn understood now that it had only changed. By breakfast, Richard had taken Evelyn's car keys, changed the gate permissions, and convinced himself he was still negotiating. Your car is staying here today, he said, sliding the keys into his jacket pocket. Evelyn stood beside the kitchen island, watching rain clouds gather beyond the windows. Why? Because we need to finish this before anyone leaves. Vanessa sat nearby with a cup of coffee, scrolling through her phone as if the conversation had nothing to do with her. Daniel is coming at 10, Evelyn said. Richard's expression shifted. Cancel him. No. Evelyn, stop turning this into a legal war. You contacted my trust administrator without me. You presented documents suggesting approval I never gave. I called my attorney. That is not war. That is paperwork. Vanessa finally looked up. You really enjoy making Richard ask permission, do you not? Evelyn turned toward her. For my property? Yes. Richard stepped between the conversation before it could sharpen further. I am trying to protect a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Then protect it with assets that belong to you. Richard's jaw tightened. You are being impossible. Evelyn almost smiled. No. I am being unavailable. She held out her hand. My keys. Take another car. The gate system no longer recognizes my access. Richard looked briefly toward Vanessa. That glance answered the question Evelyn had not asked. You changed my permissions too? Temporary security adjustment, he said. Restore them. After we talk. Evelyn lowered her hand. She could have called Daniel immediately. She could have called Marcus. Instead, she watched Richard carefully, because every hour he believed he was in control, he revealed more of what he had planned. Fine, she said. Richard relaxed. Vanessa did not. She studied Evelyn with open suspicion. An hour later, Evelyn went upstairs and found two unfamiliar employees outside the west hallway. One of them stepped aside politely. Mrs. Bennet. Who hired you? Mr. Bennet's office. And your instructions? The young man hesitated. To monitor access while the estate security system is being updated. Evelyn nodded and continued walking. Inside her bedroom, she checked the dressing table. Her passport was still there. Her personal documents were untouched. Then she opened the hidden compartment behind the bookcase. The black card remained exactly where she had left it. She slipped it into her wallet. The brass key went into the inside pocket of her coat. When she returned downstairs, Daniel Mercer was waiting in the library. Richard and Vanessa were there too. Daniel placed a folder on the table. I have reviewed the Meridian financing package. Hartwell Trust assets cannot be pledged without authorization from the controlling beneficiary. Richard folded his arms. We understand that. Daniel looked at him. Then I am unclear why the estate appears in your financing materials. Vanessa answered smoothly. It was exploratory. Exploratory documents were presented to lenders. The room went quiet. Evelyn turned toward Richard. Lenders? Richard said nothing. Daniel opened the folder. At least two institutions received materials identifying Hartwell Estate as potential collateral support. Evelyn felt the betrayal settle differently now. The affair had broken something personal. This threatened something her family had protected for generations. Did you authorize that? She asked Richard. It was preliminary. That is not an answer. I was trying to keep the acquisition alive. Vanessa stepped forward. And you would not have needed to if you had supported your husband. Evelyn looked at her. You keep using that word as if marriage transfers ownership. Maybe marriage is supposed to mean partnership. Then perhaps you should have considered that before joining mine. Vanessa's face lost color. Richard spoke sharply. Enough. Evelyn turned back to him. I agree. Give me my car keys. Restore my access. Remove Hartwell Estate from every financing document before the end of the day. Or what? Richard asked. Daniel looked at Evelyn, but she did not look away from her husband. Or I stop treating this as a marriage problem. Richard stared at her for several seconds. Then he smiled with a confidence that no longer seemed natural. You really think you hold every card? Evelyn felt the black card inside her wallet. No, she said quietly. I think you have no idea which ones I hold. Daniel left shortly after noon. By 3, the weather service was warning of a severe evening storm. By 4, Evelyn discovered Richard had instructed the household staff not to accept any changes from her without his approval. At 4:15, she opened her email and saw a message Daniel had marked urgent. The subject contained only 4 words. "We found another filing." Evelyn opened the attachment, read the first page, and felt the last of her uncertainty disappear. Richard had not merely tried to borrow against the Hartwell name. He had begun building a paper trail designed to make it appear that he controlled the estate. At 6:30, the storm reached Hartwell Estate, and so did the truth Richard had been trying to keep behind polite words and closed doors. Rain swept across the 86 acres in silver sheets while wind pressed against the tall windows. Evelyn stood in the library with Daniel's latest filing open on her phone. The document listed Richard as acting estate manager and implied he possessed broad authority over property decisions. It did not transfer ownership. It could not. But combined with the lender presentations and altered household records, it created exactly the impression Richard needed outsiders to believe. Evelyn found him in the main sitting room with Vanessa. "You filed this?" she asked, holding up her phone. Richard barely looked at it. "It is an administrative designation. It describes authority you do not have. I manage this place every day. Managing something does not make it yours." Vanessa rose from the sofa. Evelyn's mother's sapphire bracelet was still around her wrist. "There it is again," Vanessa said. "Yours. Your estate. Your family. Your name. Do you ever hear yourself?" Evelyn looked at her. "Yes. Especially when I am discussing things that actually belong to me." Richard stepped forward. "I am done with this conversation." "Good. Remove Hartwell Estate from the Meridian financing materials tonight. Tomorrow, Daniel will notify every lender who received them." Richard's expression changed. "You will destroy the acquisition." "No. I will remove property you had no right to offer." "Same result." "Then your deal was never as strong as you claimed." Vanessa shook her head. "Richard, this is exactly why I told you she would never cooperate." Evelyn turned toward her husband. "You discussed this with her before you discussed it with me?" Richard looked toward the windows. That was answer enough. Evelyn felt strangely calm. "Restore my gate access and give me my car keys." "Where are you going?" "That is no longer your concern." "Not tonight. The roads are getting worse." "Then I will call a car." Richard exhaled. "Evelyn, stop. I stopped 8 years ago. I stopped correcting you. I stopped questioning every decision you made in this house. I stopped reminding you where the introductions came from and who protected your reputation when your first investors doubted you. I thought that was love." Her voice softened. "It was permission. And I gave you too much of it." Richard stared at her. Vanessa crossed toward the foyer. "Maybe you should leave for a few days," she said. Evelyn almost could not believe the sentence. "You are asking me to leave my home?" "I am saying everyone needs space. You do not get to say what anyone needs in this house." Vanessa's face hardened. "Maybe that is your problem. You think a deed makes people loyal to you." "No. I think character does." Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the estate. Evelyn walked toward the front entrance. She needed air, distance, anything that did not contain Vanessa's voice. She opened the door and stepped beneath the covered stone portico. Cold rain blew sideways across the steps. Behind her, Richard called her name. Evelyn turned. "My keys, Richard. Come back inside and we will talk. There is nothing left to negotiate." Vanessa appeared beside him. "Then leave." Before Evelyn could answer, Vanessa pulled the door closed. The electronic lock clicked. Evelyn stared at the dark wood for a moment, certain Richard would open it again. She tried the handle. Locked. Through the narrow glass panel, she saw Vanessa standing inside. Richard was several feet behind her. Evelyn knocked once. Richard. Open the door. His face tightened. He moved half a step forward. Vanessa said something Evelyn could not hear through the glass. Richard stopped. Rain blew beneath the portico and soaked Evelyn's coat. Richard. This time she said his name more quietly. 8 years of marriage stood between them, reduced to a few feet of glass and one decision. He looked directly at her. Then he turned away. Vanessa remained at the door. You should have learned when to leave, she called through the glass. Evelyn stopped knocking. Something inside her became perfectly still. She reached into her coat. The brass key was there, cold against her fingers, but she did not use it. Not yet. Instead, she opened her wallet and removed the matte black card. For the first time in years, she read the telephone number printed across it without hesitation. Inside, Vanessa smiled when she saw the card, apparently mistaking it for something meaningless. Evelyn took out her phone. Before dialing, she looked once more through the glass at Richard's back. All right, she whispered. You made your choice. Then she entered the number her father had told her never to call unless Hartwell estate itself needed to be secured. The call connected before Evelyn heard a second ring. A man's voice answered with no greeting. Identification. Rain struck the stone around her as she held the black card beneath the porch light. For one strange second, she remembered her father placing it in her hand years earlier and telling her that real security was not about keeping people out. It was about knowing exactly who had the authority to let them in. Evelyn drew a steady breath. This is Evelyn Hartwell, controlling beneficiary of the Hartwell Legacy Trust. A pause followed. Verification phrase? She looked through the glass. Vanessa was still near the entrance, watching with open amusement. Richard had disappeared deeper into the house. Evelyn lowered her voice. A quiet house remembers its owner. Several seconds passed. Then the voice changed. Identity confirmed. Good evening, Ms. Hartwell. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. She had almost forgotten what it sounded like to hear her own name spoken without Richard's attached to it. I need Hartwell protocol activated. What level? Evelyn looked at the locked door. Black level. The response came immediately. Confirmed. Are you in immediate physical danger? No. Do you require medical assistance? No. Are unauthorized parties currently exercising control over estate access? Evelyn watched Vanessa turn away from the glass and walk toward the sitting room. Yes. Understood. Remain in a safe location. Hartwell Executive Protection is mobilizing. Estimated arrival, 18 minutes. Evelyn glanced toward the long driveway beyond the rain. Who is leading the response? Marcus Reed. Her grip tightened around the phone. Marcus is still active? For Hartwell Black Level, yes. The man paused. There is one additional notification attached to the original protocol. Evelyn already suspected the answer. Nathan Cole. Correct. Mr. Cole is listed as Strategic Security Liaison under the standing directive established by Charles Hartwell. Would you like that notification suppressed? Evelyn thought of Nathan standing outside the elevator, telling her he would respect her choice. If you need me, call. She looked back at the mansion. No. Send it. Understood. The line disconnected. Evelyn slipped the phone into her coat pocket and stepped farther beneath the portico, where the stone columns blocked most of the wind. She did not knock again. 5 minutes passed before Richard returned to the door. He unlocked it but opened it only several inches. Are you finished proving your point? Evelyn looked at him. I was not proving anything. Then come inside. Restore my access. We can deal with that tomorrow. Remove the estate from every Meridian document. Richard's patience vanished. We are not doing this in the middle of a storm. You chose the middle of a storm. Behind him, Vanessa appeared with Evelyn's mother's bracelet still shining at her wrist. "Who did you call?" she asked. Evelyn ignored her. Richard opened the door slightly wider. "Was it Daniel?" "No." "Nathan?" That surprised her. Richard saw it. "You think I do not know he was at the foundation today?" Evelyn said nothing. Richard gave a bitter laugh. "Of course. Nathan Cole appears and suddenly you find your courage." Evelyn felt something colder than the rain settle over her. "Do not give Nathan credit for a decision I made myself." "Then what decision is that?" "To stop asking permission." Vanessa folded her arms. "For what?" Evelyn looked past them into the entrance hall, at the staircase where generations of Hartwells had walked, at the wall where her wedding portrait had been removed, at the security panel glowing red beneath Richard's new code. "For my own life." Richard shook his head. "You are being dramatic." Evelyn almost answered, but a vibration from her phone interrupted her. One message. Marcus Reed. 12 minutes out. Estate perimeter authorization requested. Evelyn typed one word. Approved. Inside, a soft electronic tone sounded from the security panel. Richard turned toward it. The red light changed to amber. "What did you do?" he asked. Evelyn met his eyes. "Nothing that was not already authorized." Richard stepped toward the panel and entered his code. The screen flashed a message. Administrative access suspended pending ownership verification. Vanessa moved closer. "Richard?" He entered the code again. Same message. For the first time since Evelyn had returned home, genuine uncertainty crossed his face. "Evelyn, undo this." She remained beneath the portico. "I cannot undo something you never had the authority to control." Richard reached for his phone. Vanessa stared through the glass at Evelyn as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Then, far beyond the gates, faint white lights appeared through the rain. At first there were 2. Then 4. Then more, moving steadily up the private road toward Hartwell Estate. Richard looked past Evelyn into the storm. "Who is coming?" Evelyn did not turn around. "The people you should have asked about before you changed the locks." The first black sport utility vehicle passed through the gates without stopping. Richard watched from the doorway as 5 more followed, their headlights cutting clean lines through the rain before spreading across the circular drive. No sirens. No confusion. Every vehicle moved with the quiet precision of people who already knew exactly where they were going. Richard stepped onto the portico. "I did not authorize this." Evelyn stood several feet away, rainwater still clinging to her coat. "I know." The lead vehicle stopped near the front steps. Marcus Reed emerged beneath a large black umbrella. At 46, he looked much as Evelyn remembered him, broad-shouldered, silver beginning at his temples, his expression composed rather than intimidating. Several security professionals stepped from the other vehicles and moved toward predetermined positions around the estate. No one raised a voice. No one needed to. Marcus approached Evelyn first. He did not look at Richard. "Ms. Hartwell." Hearing the name spoken so formally made Richard glance toward her. Marcus opened the umbrella over Evelyn. "Black level verification is complete. The perimeter is secure. Current access credentials issued outside the Hartwell authorization chain have been suspended." Richard stepped forward. "Excuse me. I live here." Marcus finally turned toward him. "Your residency status is being verified, Mr. Bennett." "Verified by whom?" "The Hartwell Trust's legal representatives." Richard laughed in disbelief. "I run this estate." Marcus remained expressionless. "That is not the information attached to the Property Authority file." Vanessa appeared behind Richard. "This is absurd. Tell them to leave." Richard looked at Marcus. "You heard her. Get these people off my property." Not one member of the security team moved. Marcus turned back to Evelyn. Ms. Hartwell. Your instructions? The silence that followed felt larger than the storm. Richard stared at Evelyn as though the answer should still require his approval. She looked past him at the entrance hall. Her home. Her father's home before that. The place where she had spent years making herself smaller so Richard would never feel like a guest. Secure the estate, she said. No records leave the property. No financial files are altered or removed. Daniel Mercer is authorized full access when he arrives. Understood. Marcus touched his earpiece and quietly relayed the instructions. Richard's face tightened. Evelyn, this is insane. No. This is documentation. Another vehicle turned into the driveway. Unlike the others, it stopped farther from the steps. The rear door opened, and Nathan Cole stepped into the rain. He wore a dark overcoat over his suit and carried no umbrella. For the first time that night, Evelyn's composure shifted. Only slightly. Nathan walked toward the portico, but he did not rush to her side. He stopped several feet away. Are you all right? He asked. I am. He nodded once. Then I will not ask twice. Richard looked between them. Of course you are here. Nathan's attention moved to him. The protocol notified me. What protocol? Richard demanded. Nathan did not answer immediately. Marcus did. The Hartwell Continuity Protocol established by Charles Hartwell. Richard looked at Evelyn. Your father gave Nathan authority over my house? No, Nathan said calmly. Her father gave professionals responsibilities. Authority stayed with Evelyn. Richard's expression hardened. Stay out of my marriage. Nathan looked at him for a long moment. I intend to. Then he turned back to Evelyn. Daniel is approximately 10 minutes behind me. He asked me to tell you the lenders have been notified that no Hartwell assets were authorized for Meridian. Richard went pale. You contacted the lenders? Evelyn asked. Daniel did. Not me. Nathan's answer came without hesitation, and Evelyn understood what he was doing. He was refusing to take ownership of her fight. Vanessa stepped closer to Richard. You cannot let them do this. Evelyn looked at the sapphire bracelet on Vanessa's wrist. Take that off. Vanessa froze. What? My mother's bracelet. For the first time, there was no clever answer. Vanessa slowly unclasped it and placed it on the entry table. Evelyn picked it up and closed her fingers around it. A small thing returned. Not enough, but a beginning. Richard looked toward the security team positioned around the foyer. So what happens now? Evelyn slipped the bracelet into her pocket beside the brass key. Now we wait for Daniel. Nathan glanced toward the driveway as another pair of headlights appeared beyond the gates. You will not have to wait long. Richard turned toward the approaching sedan, and something in his face changed when he recognized Daniel Mercer's car. Evelyn saw it immediately. Fear was not what surprised her. Recognition was. Richard knew exactly what Daniel was bringing. And for the first time, Evelyn realized there might be one final document her husband had never expected her to see. Daniel Mercer entered Hartwell Mansion carrying one leather case, and Richard looked at it as if he already knew which page inside could end everything. Rain followed Daniel across the threshold in tiny drops before Marcus closed the door behind him. Evelyn had changed into a dry coat but remained near the entrance table, her mother's sapphire bracelet resting safely in her pocket. Nathan stood several feet away, close enough to support her but far enough to make it clear that every decision remained hers. Daniel removed his glasses. We should do this in the library. Richard shook his head. Whatever you have to say it here. Very well. Daniel opened the case and removed 3 folders. Hartwell Estate consists of the mansion, 86 acres, protected structures, and associated trust property. Title is held through the Hartwell Legacy Trust. Evelyn Hartwell is the controlling beneficiary. Vanessa folded her arms. We already know her name is attached to it. Daniel looked at her. Her name is not merely attached to it. He turned toward Richard. Your marriage granted residency and certain household privileges. It granted no ownership interest in the trust property and no independent authority to pledge, transfer, encumber, or represent these assets as yours. Richard's face tightened. I never transferred anything. You represented control to third parties. Daniel opened the second folder. 2 lenders received financing materials identifying Hartwell assets as potential support for the Meridian acquisition. The trust administrator received a filing describing you as acting estate manager. And this afternoon, we discovered the document that concerns me most. He placed a single page on the entry table. Evelyn stepped closer. Richard did not. Daniel continued. This is a draft certification prepared for one of the lenders. It states that household and operational control of Hartwell Estate had been delegated to Richard Bennett pending formal restructuring. Evelyn read the page. At the bottom was a blank line bearing her printed name. No signature. Richard spoke quickly. Draft certification. Exactly. It was never executed. Because Evelyn refused to sign, Daniel said. The issue is not whether it succeeded. The issue is what you intended others to believe. Vanessa turned toward Richard. You said the authorization was basically done. Richard ignored her. Daniel, this is a business misunderstanding. Then it can be resolved as one. Every representation involving Hartwell assets will be withdrawn tonight. That could collapse Meridian. That is not Evelyn's legal responsibility. Richard looked at his wife. Say something. Evelyn stared at the blank signature line. For days, he had treated her consent as an obstacle to be managed. Now he wanted her voice because it was the only thing left that could protect him. What would you like me to say? She asked. That this has gone too far. Evelyn looked around the foyer. You changed my access code. You removed staff who had served my family for years. You let another woman take things from my private room. You presented my property to lenders after I said no. And tonight, when I stood outside that door, you chose not to open it. Richard lowered his voice. I was angry. So was I. I still knew whose house this was. Vanessa stepped forward. This is ridiculous. Richard lives here. I was invited here. Evelyn turned to Marcus. Her voice remained calm. Does Vanessa Pierce have any continuing authorization to remain on the property? Marcus checked the tablet in his hand. No, Ms. Hartwell. Vanessa stared at Richard. Do something. Richard looked toward the security team, then toward Daniel, and finally toward Evelyn. His confidence was gone. You are throwing me out, he asked. Evelyn reached into her pocket and removed the old brass key. She placed it gently on the entry table between them. No. I am ending your authority over something that was never yours. Daniel closed the folder. Mr. Bennett, temporary accommodations can be arranged while counsel addresses the marital residence issue. You may collect personal necessities tonight under supervision. The remainder can be handled formally. Richard stared at the key. 8 years, Evelyn. I know. His voice softened. Does none of that matter? For the first time that evening, pain crossed her face. It mattered enough that I kept giving you chances to remember who you were. Richard looked down. Vanessa had already removed her phone and was gathering her bag. The difference between them was suddenly obvious. Richard had mistaken her hunger for status as belief in him, and Vanessa had mistaken his access as ownership. Evelyn picked up the brass key again. Marcus. He turned toward her. Yes, Miss Hartwell? She looked at the staircase, the missing wedding portrait, the unfamiliar flowers, and finally the front door that had been closed against her less than an hour earlier. Remove everyone who no longer has permission to be here. Marcus nodded. Understood. Richard lifted his eyes to Evelyn one final time. She did not look triumphant. That seemed to hurt him more than anger would have. As Marcus quietly arranged their departure, Nathan remained where he was, saying nothing. Only after the front doors closed again did Evelyn realize her hand was trembling. Nathan noticed, but he did not reach for her. "What happens now?" he asked. Evelyn looked down at the brass key in her palm. "Now," she said, "I decide what this house becomes." 3 months later, the first thing Evelyn changed about Hartwell Mansion was not the locks. It was the light. On winter evenings, every window across the eastern wing now glowed warmly against the snow, because the rooms that Richard had once treated as symbols of status had become offices for the Hartwell Community Foundation. The old ballroom hosted scholarship meetings. Her father's study remained untouched except for one new photograph of Margaret standing beside Evelyn on the morning she returned as estate manager. Thomas was back too, complaining happily about deer near the South Gardens as though he had never left. The unfamiliar staff Richard had hired were offered fair reviews rather than blamed for decisions they had not made. Some stayed. Some moved on. Evelyn wanted the house restored, not frozen in time. The Meridian acquisition collapsed after lenders removed Hartwell assets from consideration. Richard's company survived, but smaller and without the borrowed appearance of family wealth. Through attorneys, he accepted responsibility for the misleading financing materials and agreed never again to represent authority over Hartwell property. The divorce moved quietly through mediation. Evelyn asked for no public humiliation. She wanted her name back, her boundaries respected, and the truth recorded accurately. Vanessa disappeared from Richard's business life almost as quickly as she had entered his home. Evelyn heard about it from someone else and felt nothing resembling victory. Some endings did not need applause. They only needed to stay ended. One cold February afternoon, Evelyn stood in the entrance hall studying the wall beside the staircase. The wedding portrait had never returned. In its place hung a photograph of Charles and Evelyn Hartwell taken years earlier on the front steps, both laughing at something outside the frame. The doorbell rang. Evelyn smiled when she opened it. Nathan Cole stood beneath a gray sky holding a small wooden box. "You know you can come through the gate without an appointment," she said. "I know. Marcus told me your access is permanent." "Marcus says many dangerous things." Evelyn laughed. Nathan's eyes softened at the sound. Over the previous 3 months, he had visited often, but never without asking. Sometimes it was foundation business. Sometimes coffee. Once, he had driven 40 miles to bring documents Daniel could easily have mailed. Evelyn had noticed. She had also noticed that Nathan never asked when she would be ready to date again. He never treated patience like an investment waiting for a return. "What is that?" she asked, looking at the box. Nathan handed it to her. "Something Marcus found near the portico after the storm." Evelyn opened the lid. Inside lay the old brass key. She stared at it. "I thought this was upstairs." "You had a replacement made." "I thought I lost the original." "You did. For about 90 days. She lifted it carefully. The metal was polished now, but one familiar scratch remained near the edge. "My father gave me this when I was 23. I remember." Evelyn looked up. "You were there?" Nathan nodded. "Not in the room. Your father showed it to me afterward. He said he wanted you to understand that ownership was responsibility, not permission to control people." Evelyn smiled faintly. "That sounds like him. He worried people would see the Hartwell name before they saw you." Nathan paused. "I think he underestimated you." Evelyn looked through the open doorway toward the long driveway. Snow rested along the stone walls where rain had poured that night. "I underestimated myself," she said. Nathan shook his head. "No. You trusted someone. Those are not the same thing." She turned the key between her fingers. "For a while, I thought losing Richard meant I had failed at building a home." "And now?" Evelyn looked behind her. Somewhere upstairs, foundation employees were laughing. Margaret was arguing with a caterer in the kitchen. The old clock near the library had been returned to its place. The mansion no longer felt like a museum or a prize. It felt inhabited. Now I think a home is where nobody has to become smaller to stay. Nathan held her gaze. That sounds worth protecting. It is. He stepped backward toward the porch. I should let you get back to work. Evelyn watched him turn. Nathan. He stopped. You drove 40 miles to return a key. 42. And you are leaving without coffee? A smile appeared. I was trying not to assume. Evelyn looked at the brass key, then at the open door between them. For years, she had believed love meant keeping doors open even when someone stopped deserving entry. Now she understood the difference between shutting someone out and choosing whom to welcome in. She stepped aside. Come inside. Nathan crossed the threshold only after she invited him. Evelyn closed the door against the February cold, but left the hallway lights burning. The brass key remained warm in her hand. She had thought she lost it. She had thought she lost far more than that. But the truth was simpler. The house had always been hers. The life beyond it was hers too. And this time, whatever came through that door would enter because Evelyn Hartwell had chosen it.